thank you for watching our Tuesday night virtual Can I Push It with Reverend Dr. Howard John Wesley. Now, here are our upcoming announcements for this week.
To help combat the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak, Alfred Street Baptist Church has suspended all in-person worship services, activities, and events until further notice. We know that these are difficult and challenging times. We invite you to stay connected by participating in our online worship services and remain faithful in your giving online via our Alfred Street website, ASBC app, and on our text messaging system. If you have any questions about giving, please feel free to email our finance department at finance@alfredstreet.org.
Our pastor's pick for the February book of the month is entitled How the Word is Passed, A Reckoning with the History of Slavery Across America by Clint Smith. This book is a deeply researched and transporting exploration of the legacy of slavery and its imprint on centuries of American history. For more information on or about this book, visit our website, our ASBC app, or purchase a copy at your favorite retailer. We invite everyone to join us as we remember and celebrate the Lenten season with your Alfred Street family and friends, commencing on March 2nd through Thursday, April 14th. Join your ASBC family as we kick off the celebration of 40 Days of Lent. Speaking of Ash Wednesday, we invite everyone to join us for our annual drive-through of Ashes to Go on March 2nd, Ash Wednesday. Ashes to Go will take place right here at Alfred Street Baptist Church, outside directly in front of the church from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m., 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., and 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time.
Alfred Street, it's that time of year. Get ready and save the dates because March Gladness Spring Revival 2022 is coming. Join us online every Tuesday in March starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time to witness some of the greatest and most powerful messages of faith that will certainly revive you. We have an amazing and exceptional lineup of guest speakers waiting to inspire and motivate you and your family. Don't miss Alfred Street's March Gladness Spring Revival 2022. Hey Alfred Street, Versus is back in stock. Our Versus team has been working around the clock to create another batch of our popular Versus Bible-based trivia card game, and they're now available for purchase. That's right, purchase your set of Versus cards today before we sell out again. Visit our website or ASBC app and be the first to get your hands on Versus, a Bible-based trivia game by Alfred Street Baptist Church. What better way to spark meaningful conversations while also gaining knowledge of the Word of God? Versus is packed with questions about animals, kingship, parables, miracles, and much more. Versus is the perfect way to bring your family together while also helping to grow the ministry of Alfred Street Baptist Church. It includes 150 trivia cards in a handy compact box set.
Our Office of Christian Care and Counseling would like to remind everyone that February is International Self-Esteem Month. This observation for the believer encourages us to pause, assess, and prayerfully implement ways that can help improve our self-esteem. Visit our website or ASBC app for additional tips and resources as you continue on your journey in becoming all that God has created you to be. For questions and concerns regarding mental health, please email pastoralcounseling@alfredstreet.org. Speaking of our Office of Christian Care and Counseling, be sure to join us virtually via Zoom on Friday, February 25th, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, as Reverend Dr. Latasha L. Morgan hosts a virtual webinar entitled Mental Health and the Sacred Sanctuary, a conversation addressing mental health stigma. This virtual event is open to everyone, no registration needed. Just join in the conversation via Zoom. For additional information, email pastoralcounseling@alfredstreet.org. Hey Alfred Street family and friends, are you visiting us for the very first time? Or perhaps you're new to Alfred Street and you want to stay connected to us or receive the latest Alfred Street updates via text. If so, all visitors, text the word VISITORS with an S to our new direct text number, 571-977-4525. That's 571-977-4525. Or if you're not a new visitor, but you want to receive the latest Alfred Street updates via text, please text the words ASBC News That's ASBC News, no space between ASBC and News, to that same direct number, 571-977-4525. Again, text ASBC News to 571-977-4525, and you'll receive the latest Alfred Street updates about upcoming events and activities. Please note that data rates may apply, so please check with your phone carriers. We thank you in advance for worshiping with us virtually. Our Worship Experience Ministry, also known as WEM, is inviting everyone to our Virtual Room Ministry open house on Saturday, February 26th, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. This will be a perfect opportunity to connect with God and your Alfred Street family via our ministry programming. We will have virtual booth visits, virtual meet and greets with our ministry program leaders, and much more. We're confident that you will find your place here at Alfred Street. Be sure to register online today or visit our ASBC app and or our weekly e-blast. Please note that the Zoom information will be provided upon registration on the day of the event. Our Children, Youth, and College Ministry present their annual Black History Month worship experience entitled The Black Zone on Saturday, February 26th, starting at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Join our Children and Youth Ministry for this one-of-a-kind virtual worship experience as we celebrate Black culture and the history of our ancestors on both our YouTube channel and or our Facebook Live page. Our Children and Youth Ministry are seeking volunteers. We all know that children are our future. Please sign up online today to volunteer by no later than February 28th. We need your support. Background checks will be completed on all accepted volunteers. Email childrenandyouth@alfredstreet.org for more information.
Alfred Street Baptist Church welcomes a new ministry for 2022 entitled the ASBC Widow and Widowers Ministry. The Widow and Widowers Ministry will commence during the month of February, so stay tuned for more information and updates. This new ministry will use building blocks of friendship, fellowship, and fun to help widows and widowers navigate their transition and learn to blossom through the years as they trust the Lord for their life. This ministry will host a plethora of activities, including bringing in speakers to discuss important topics and issues, such as a hobbies extravaganza, education seminars, and so much more. We invite you to join this new ministry. For more information, please email waw@alfredstreet.org. Hey Alfred Street, speaking of new things, our intercessory prayer ministry is introducing an ASBC prayer wall for 2022. It's praying time, so this ASBC prayer wall will be accessible 24 hours a day online. Visit our website and or ASBC app for more info. You can also email prayer@alfredstreet.org for additional information.
We invite everyone to continue to join your Alfred Street ministers and family Monday through Friday for our popular 7 a.m. Eastern Time prayer call. Join us in prayer and praise Monday through Friday only by dialing 425-436-6277, access code 246114 #. Again, that's 425-436-6277, access code 246114 #. Our new prayer line number will accommodate up to 2,000 participants. However, once we reach capacity, we will continue to offer the playback option. Call our playback number anytime after 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time each day, Monday through Friday, and you'll be able to replay the prayer call that you missed. To reach the playback line, please dial 425-436-6278 and enter the access code 246114 #. Please note that this is not a toll-free number, and therefore, depending on your phone carrier, rates may apply. Alfred Street Baptist Church's Christian Life Institute presents Bible Basics on Thursday, February 24th, starting at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Bible Basics will introduce you to the Bible while teaching you the fundamentals of biblical study with Alfred Street's very own Reverend William Spencer. Online registration is required to participate. Please note that the Zoom information will be provided after registration. Email CLI@alfredstreet.org for more information.
If you're interested in becoming a member of the historic Alfred Street Baptist Church, please email deacons with an S at alfredstreet.org or complete the membership form on our website or on our ASBC app. Kid Street, Crossover, and Higher Ground are back in session at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the 1st, 3rd, 4th, and 5th Sundays. Parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, and or guardians, please make sure that you've registered your child or children to receive the most up-to-date information on all children and youth programmatic offerings. Alfred Street's Men's Ministry invites all men to join us virtually for weekly Men's Sunday School. Email men@alfredstreet.org to receive the Zoom virtual classroom information. Also, we invite you to tune in to our Faith Forward weekly radio broadcast featuring Pastor Howard John Wesley every Sunday morning at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Magic 102.3 FM and 92.7 FM for a powerful sermon that will move you forward in your faith.
For more information on these and all the exciting events taking place here at Alfred Street, please log on to alfredstreet.org.
Can I push it? Can I push it? Can I push it? Can I push it? Hey, Can I Push It crowd? Welcome back to another Tuesday night. I'm grateful to greet you with the joy and the love of God, who loves us as a mother and a father, in Jesus Christ, who alone is our resurrected, our risen, our reigning, and our returning Redeemer. If this is your first time logging into Can I Push It, you're in for a treat. This is not Bible study as normal. We don't just open up a Bible and read a verse and say what we think it means. This is an opportunity for us to stretch our thinking and our theology, to deal with some of the controversial and the debative and divisive issues within our faith. And during this month of February, to talk about race and religion as we continue to explore the depths of African-American Christianity. Listen, I want you all to do me a favor. We will be ending shortly in February, but if you have some ideas or topics or subject matter that you're curious about, that maybe you want us to dive into in some future Can I Push It episodes, do me a favor, email that to me. You can email it at CIPI@alfredstreet.org. That stands for Can I Push It @alfredstreet.org. Send me the topics you want. We'll pray over them. And maybe, just maybe, one of yours will show up in our future episodes. You all know that during the month of February, we've been engaging in this discussion about race and religion and Christianity and the church, and how the church and Christianity has factored into the lives of African Americans. We started with Dr. Aubrey Hendricks and his work, Christians Against Christianity. Last week, we welcomed Dr. Dean Yolanda Pierce from Howard University as we talked about the history of the church, about the present movement of the church, and the future of the church. And tonight, I am thrilled and tickled black all over myself to introduce to you all for the very first time a sister who I've been in a relationship with for quite some time, beginning as a student in my graduate studies, and then as a colleague in ministry. The Reverend Dr. Cheryl Townsend Jilks is the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Professor of African American Studies and Sociology, and the director of the program. No longer the director, just the professor. She's a professor of African American Studies and Sociology at Colby College up in Maine. She's an ordained Baptist preacher and an assistant to the pastor at Union Baptist Church in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But more than that, she's a beloved friend and one who's going to bless us today. Dr. Jilks, welcome to Can I Push It?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate you. It is so good, Pastor Wesley, to hear you and see you and to be part of your ministry here, your cutting edge ministry with this wonderful, deep, historic church. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm glad to have you. Glad to have
I'm just happy, glad to see you, to lay eyes
Yeah.
on your beautiful face, and you still look like a student.
Well, I'll take that because I'm still learning, ever learning.
Okay.
If you ever want to learn, stay in the Baptist church. You will always be in a class.
Yes.
I want to welcome you, Dr. Jilks. I need to say in full disclosure that our paths crossed years ago at my first church. when I was pastoring there in Springfield, Massachusetts, and you blessed us with Women's Day, being there on and St. John's with us. So I'm welcoming you to Alfred Street for the very first time. We can't wait for this COVID stuff to pass over to bring you down and share a word in the pulpit as well.
I love it when somebody shares their pulpit and gives me a chance to preach, because when one is not pastoring, one is dependent upon the goodwill of pastors in a wide variety of settings. And I would love to come. So right away, I'll be there.
Well, my desire is to bring the best and the brightest to Alfred Street. So you are on that list, and we look forward to welcoming you. Dr. Juice, tell us a little bit about yourself. People may not be familiar. Can you share a little bit about your family journey, your genetic journey, your scholarly journey? Yeah, we want to know a little bit about Dr. Cheryl
Well,
Townsend.
the genetic journey, I've got an ancestor, a Mende ancestor who's 37,000 years old, according to 23andMe.
Okay.
and praise God, I was blessed to have my parents until 2014 and 2016, until they were 94 and 96 respectively. And I had them earlier. I had the two 92-year-olds in the dining room with the test tubes, spitting in the test tubes. So I get the reports on both of them, as well as myself, from 23andMe. And my father's guess about where our family came from also showed up in that pattern. So on mommy's side, I'm heavily Mende, and on daddy's side, I'm heavily Nigerian and Senegalese. So you asked the genetics, but I have these two wonderful parents. I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I am in the process of writing down little topics, little elements for a possible memoir. Not that I'm famous enough to have a memoir, but I'm just writing these things down and appreciating my parents. I did a meditation for my church about Black History Month, and my very first Negro History Week program. Yes, I'm old enough to remember Negro History Week. Okay, I'm old.
Okay, Carter G. Okay, Carter G.
Yeah. Was a program at my church where we had a film and a talk about the Haitian Revolution. So that was the very first Negro History Week. And bless his heart, my father was the head of the BYF, and he was also, I grew up in a Baptist deacon's home. So that meant I was in the house and listening at one end of the phone when all the dramas that go with Baptist churches went on, and you learn early. And so I had that. And then my dad was from Indiana, in Indianapolis. Well, he was born in Indianapolis. We're actually from Greencastle. The family is from Greencastle, from an ancestor, a great-great-grandfather who was born in 1810 in Snow Hill, Maryland, and ended up, by the time he was 15 years old, in Greencastle, Indiana, and free by 1830. So, wow. Yeah, so that's on my father's side, and that's an AME Pentecostal heritage on that side of the family. And on my mother's side of the family, my grandmother was a Savannah Baptist, Baptist woman from Savannah. And so, that's like being Baptist royalty, although I didn't know it as a little kid. And her sister, interestingly enough, she was born 1883, and her sister, my auntie, my great aunt, was born in 1880 and was raised in Macon, because my great grandparents, who were born in slavery, the woman who helped raise my mother was born in slavery in Georgia. They had moved to Savannah, and the folks back home said, "You will send the next baby that's born back home to keep us company." So my great aunt got sent to live with my great-great-grandparents, and she waited until she was 97 years old. She did two things. She told me how to make black-eyed peas and rice the way she made it. And she also, I was the only one in the family whom she told that she had witnessed a lynching. Oh, so, wow. Yeah. So wow. You feel a special connection. And my mother, carefully, I just wrote about this recently, after she taught me the "Now I lay me down to sleep," and she would kneel down with me. Then it was time to graduate to the Lord's Prayer, and once we got that memorized, we graduated to the 23rd Psalm and got that memorized. So I got a lot of spiritual and cultural capital from all of those pieces of my family. My grandfather being a general elder in the House of God, which is the Church of the Living God, Pillar and Ground of the Truth Incorporated. And when you are a little kid, you have to learn the whole name.
That's
and
right.
that influenced the work I do on the Sanctified Church, because one of the things you learn is when you meet other African Americans, one of the ways we connect is, what church do you go to? You know, that's how. And when somebody says, oh, I'm over in the Sanctified Church, and folks will go, mm-hmm, or they'll go, which one? Yeah. And once you say which one, then there's a whole conversation and this wonderful mosaic of African American religious history that people carry with them and talk about. And so that's it. But my parents ended up in Cambridge, Massachusetts because of World War II. Daddy was stationed at Fort Devens, and that's where I grew up. I grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in a church that has a stained glass window that was installed by the great Charlotte Hawkins Brown.
Wow, wow, wow. So listen, as I hear all that history there, I assume, and hopefully rightfully so, that kind of sparked this interest for you becoming really one of the preeminent scholars of African-American religion and history, you know, within the United States. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey academically and where your passions start to develop for your own scholarship?
Well, thank you for such an affirmation. Daddy did not want me to major in sociology, but he finally came around, and my determination to understand African Americans really was sparked. I sort of have to back up. Okay, there's all sorts of threads in this wonderful thing. Growing up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, you grow up in an ethnically diverse community. We had representation on the school board, so no one Black community was assigned to one school. They were broken up in certain ways. So we were never segregated. I can't say integrated schools because we were never segregated, if you understand what I'm saying. Yeah. And one time we were sitting in the playground. I was sitting with a bunch of friends, and they started having this conversation. We must have been about 9 or 10 years old. And the questions, I was the only Black one sitting there in this little group. We were on this new apparatus that they'd gotten in the schoolyard. And everybody was saying, what are you? What are you? And I've learned, I learned later, and I tell my students this, thanks to Abraham Joshua Heschel and his book, Who is Man? You don't ask another human being, what are you? It's who are you? But when we're 9 or 10 years old, we don't know those philosophical distinctions, you know, and we don't, you know, we're not into critical ontology at that point in our lives. So the question was what, and so I'm Greek, I'm Italian. And when my friends were saying they were Greek or Italian, some of them, for instance, there were twins in my class who arrived the same day at kindergarten that I did in full Greek clothing, speaking not a word of English. And they were split up and one was sent to one kindergarten class and the other was sent to the other kindergarten class. And I had friends who were absolutely fluent in Italian, and we would be going, you know, around to different ones' houses and playing, and they would get into these screaming matches with their grandmothers or their mothers. And I'm standing there like, if I screamed at my grandmother like that, my jaw would be broken. And I would ask, I'm going, is this about me? And they go, no. And then they go back to screaming at the grandmother or the mother or the brother. And I found out later it was about me. So that was part of the struggle. But I went home and I said to my dad, Daddy, what are we? You'll love this Morehouse man. He pulled the atlas off the shelf. He opened it up. He pointed to the west coast of Africa and he said, we come from somewhere along in here. We are part of a group of people who may have lost a war. And then, and we got shipped out to be slaves in the Americas. But he said, then my father, being a father with a little girl who still believed in fairy tales, told me this fantastic story that had me believing that I was descended from royalty. I was convinced. And it wasn't until I was in college when I had to call him up on the telephone and I discovered that that we who are African American, at that time we were still Negro, I've been through them all the iterations. Okay. And I'm like, wait a minute. Nobody was at the docks taking names, and we don't get. I said, Daddy, what? He said, well, you were a little kid. I had to tell you something. And he laughed. And then later on, I had a friend with whom I was at church who was from Nigeria. And she was Yoruba. And I was telling her the story. And she had already met my dad. And I was telling her how he had convinced me that I was royalty. And at one point in my life, that convincing made it possible for me to stand against a whole lot of bullying and violence during high school. But that's another story we won't go into. But the story did have its benefits before I had to critique it. And so I told her the story and she laughed and she thought that was so cute. And she just looked at me, And then her father came to visit one Sunday. And he is a chief. And he walked in and she turned around and laughed. She said, he looks like your dad, doesn't he? And so, it was like this story that Daddy told came full circle. So there was always the interest in Africa, going beyond. My parents carefully curated my childhood so that a lot of the stuff that people saw on TV, I didn't get to see because they wouldn't buy a television because they were afraid I wouldn't read. So when I ran out of library books, I had to read the newspaper. And so I can remember as a little kid having the Pittsburgh Courier. I'm reading this article. I'm sitting in the middle of the floor and I get to this word in the article and it is about de jure and de facto. And I'm asking my mother, Mommy, what's this word segregation? And my mother has to explain segregation to a little kid who's never been to the South. Plus, my mother had never been to the South because when my grandmother left Georgia, people would ask her, Miss Reed, are you from the South? And she'd say, yes, and I intend to stay from the South. And she had gone through such a transformation in her speech that people had to literally ask her if she was from the South. And I later learned when she was speaking and didn't want me to know what she was talking about, she was speaking Gullah, but I didn't realize that until Daughters of the Dust came out. And I've like, oh my goodness, what's going on here? So, my mother explained it to me in a way that made sense. But I remember reading this article that said, we have dealt with de jure. I didn't realize it was de jure, the long vowel, right, with the E on the end, right? I didn't realize until, and it's so we've dealt with de jure, and now the problem is de facto segregation, which I now knew was segregation. And I'm sitting there in my little kid spirit and my little kid's mind going, okay, what will they think of next? And that question, which is now, how does racism, how does what people are calling structural racism, how does this system, how does this racialized social system keep reinventing itself? What are people doing to keep it going? So I was always asking that question. So part of me focuses in on race and ethnicity at the same time that I started, and it was accidental that I focused in on the church. And then God moved in mysterious ways. When I finally defended my dissertation.
What was your dissertation on?
African-American women leaders. It was called Going Up for the Oppressed, the emergent career of the Black woman community worker. And you got little pieces of that in my book, if it wasn't for the women. But so I literally identified, in an urban community, I identified a group of women, because my father had said how important it was, the women who had helped him when he was doing community work, trying to raise money for scholarships. And he was talking, and he would name all these women who helped him. My father, special man, obviously, you can tell I keep talking about him. But when I was little, it was one of these things where Daddy, and he said so, he said, I'm married into a family of women. And my mother and my aunts and her cousins and my grandmother, they loved him. They loved him. And so, and he would tell me, he said, I married into a family of witches. You're just a little one. You don't have your full powers yet. But, he was I married into a family of rice eaters. He would always talk about it because he was from Indianapolis. And, my grandmother's from Savannah. So all of that. So Daddy would talk about the importance of women, talk about the importance of women in the church, talk about the importance of women. Plus, my grandfather's church ordained women. So women matter. And so I'm finding these women, and the criterion for being in my study was you had to be identified in the community as somebody, quote unquote, who has worked hard for a long time for change in the Black community. You also had to be mentioned in the local newspapers at least 8 years before the beginning of the study. So I sort of eliminated women who were just sort of a flash in the pan. And I had people who really, and I had a range of people. My oldest was like 83, and I think my youngest was maybe 30, so that was the range of women. And I did oral histories with these women. And at the time, I'm still a secular sociologist, because sociologists were like, religion's going to end, Marx, religion is the opiate of the people, and all this other stuff that's going on. But in the meantime, I'm doing this study. I defend the dissertation, end up defending it at 7:00 in the morning on August 31st, 1979, because the American Sociological Association meeting was in Boston, and they didn't want to have to pay somebody's airfare to get the outside reader there for the defense. Mm-hmm. And at 7:00 in the morning, who shows up for the defense? My dad. Oh, he had read the entire rough draft. And when I called him to tell him that the first draft wasn't acceptable, and I should say he also liked my dissertation advisor because she was also a World War II veteran. So these two World War II veterans liked each other. And when I said, Daddy, it's going to take another year, I've got to revise this. And he goes, oh, I'm so glad that lady's not going to let you graduate with those big old chapters in that dissertation. He had read that's the kind of support I got from my dad, who wasn't an academic, but totally supported me. And so when we got into the defense, after it was over, my outside reader was a man by the name of Roy Bryce Laporte. He was a sociologist who's originally from Panama and specialized in the African and African descended migration to the United States, especially since 1965. That was one of his specialties. And he turned around, he saw my dad, he said, look, he said, you and I both know as Black fathers, it's hard to get a daughter through school. So I know you've got something to say. So he asked my father to say something. And Daddy said, I like this work that's being done. I wish somebody would do something like this with the Sanctified Church. And so and in the meantime, I'm on a spiritual track, and the two collided, especially around my article, The Black Church is a Therapeutic Community, which I wrote. It was an accident. It wasn't an accident. It was a providential event that was guided by God. I know that now, but at the time, I was in resistance, in denial, and all of that. I got an invitation. It was 1976. They were going to have a bicentennial session on the Black Church at the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. And they were recruiting people, because there were so few of us, to be in the meeting. And so I get this phone call inviting me. And I had just gone to a couple of lectures by my favorite psychiatrist, R.D. Lang. He's such a favorite. My first car was named Ronnie after him. Okay. And people were getting up. We were at the Arlington Street Church. He had lectured for 2 nights in a row. And people were getting up talking about these radical therapies. And I was also in graduate school teaching all these different courses. And one of the courses that I taught was the sociology of mental health. So it means you have to review all of this literature, and you've got this big block of stuff going on. And so I recognized what people were talking about. And I'm like, when they're talking about these therapies, I said, gee, we've been doing that in the Black church for a couple of 100 years. And I'm like, okay. So I didn't think anything of it. So when they called, it was like a light went off. And I turned in the topic, the Black Church is a Therapeutic Community, and began to work on that paper. One of my principal points that I make is that the church functioned to tell us what was really real. Because when you don't agree, when your mindset doesn't agree with the dominant culture, you get defined as crazy. The dominant culture doesn't recognize the suffering and the racism that we go through. And if we agreed with the dominant culture, we'd be dead, not only physically, but also mentally. And when you look at the statistics, and this is a very odd kind of statistic to talk about, but somebody's done a master's paper since I wrote the article that bears this out. Psychologists are able to predict rates of mental illness according to social class. In other words, according to your income level. If you take and look at social class in the Black community, we are not as crazy as we should be. We should have even, okay, does that make sense what I'm saying? Yeah, okay. You know, we're disproportionately poor, so we have to be careful with that one and a whole range of things. But it turns out that some of the things that we do, and I didn't even know that then, that we have done, that our ancestors did, moving and singing are one of the most important, there's a whole book on it now, responses to trauma. But we didn't have the degrees and the clinical licenses and to understand that. But our ancestors, that cultural capital that they brought with them across on the boat that they did not lose. No, we're not speaking Mende anymore. No, we're not speaking Yoruba anymore. No, we're not speaking those languages. And unless you're in the South Carolina Sea Islands or you've done 23andMe, you really can't sort of name your peoples of origin accurately. But we brought all that cultural capital and used it to build a culture of resistance, a culture of survival and thriving. So I got this paper all written. I called the people, they said, oh, we've canceled the session. So I got this paper. And my advisors, I'm still in graduate school, and my advisors say, oh, this is publishable. They helped me with the editing, and we submit it to this journal. Now, and the person who was the editor of the journal was friends with my advisors. Well, they sent it out for peer review, 4 reviewers. They threw it on the floor. They jumped up and down on it. One of them actually Xeroxed marks and sent it back with the comments because he was convinced I didn't know anything about Karl Marx and the importance of understanding religion as an opiate of the people. Okay, and my advisors are going, what happened? She must have sent this to hostile reviewers. So all of a sudden, as a graduate student, I'm learning the process, the publication process. This is what Du Bois is talking about when we've got this second sight, whenever feels one's two-ness. You sort of have to observe what's going on in the white world, in the crazy world, and then trying to make sense of it. So I'm listening to what they're saying. I took all of the reviewers' comments and the paper. I put it in an envelope. I called Professor Charles Willey at Harvard. I had met him as a graduate student, all because my father had said, well, if you're going to be a sociologist, they must have some kind of national meeting. I'll give you a plane ticket to go to the meeting as a graduation present when I was first starting. And so the very first year of graduate school, I met all these Black sociologists, including Dr. Willey, who became my friend and became an informal mentor. So I sent him the paper and the reviewers' comments, and he read it. He said, there's something wrong here. In the meantime, the paper was part of my writing sample as I'm applying for jobs, my tenure track jobs. I applied for a job at the university where the editor of the journal that has just now rejected my paper is under faculty. And she opens up my file and she starts reading the paper and she goes, oh, I need this paper for my journal. And she runs down to the office and the managing editor says to her, Arlene, you cannot publish this because you just had 4 associate editors reject it. I know this because this woman had the character to stand up and apologize and say, yes, she did discriminate against me. She read the title of the paper and she wanted to make sure she had enough space in the journal to publish feminist writing. So she sent it to hostile reviewers so that she could reject it legitimately. Wow. But in the meantime, I've got this paper. And who comes to speak at Boston University? Reverend Dr. James Hal Cone.
Oh, wow.
And I go up to him. He speaks in Marsh Chapel, and I'm in awe. This is like, oh my God, God Jr. has come to Marsh Chapel. So I go up to him very humbly and I say, Dr. Cone, I have a paper. Would you be willing to read it? And he said, yes. Yes, send it to me. So I sent it to him. He sends back a letter. He says, send it to the Journal for the Interdenominational Theological Center. I send it to them. They send it out for peer review. 4 reviewers come back, publish, no revisions, no revisions, no revisions, no revisions. Boom, it went right into the journal and it's been there ever since. So that was a start. But then I went back to my little secular sociology thing. I sort of had this experience that I later learned was my call, but I thought I was having auditory hallucinations. So I went to therapy instead of answering my call. And it took a little while, and so life came together. I ended up working with Dr. Cone. He needed a woman person on doctoral committees who had, you have to have a PhD to be on those committees. So he had me reading dissertations that he was supervising at Union as an outside reader, but also got me connected with the Fund for Theological Education. So I got to spend a lot of time with Dr. Cone as we were reviewing applicants and interviewing people. And so that's how my life sort of came together to do both. And I got the job at Boston University, and one of my senior mentors, of course, they assigned a mentor to me, and he came to my office all full of energy, and he reached over like I was one of the fellows, grabbed my knee and said to me, now that you're here, you're going to do that real sociology and stop doing that Black stuff, right? And I looked at him and I grinned, and I reached over like he was one of the guys, grabbed his knee and said, I became a sociologist to make that Black stuff part of the mainstream of sociology. Right. And so and here we are. That was 1978. And here we are. And one of the reasons I went to Colby and I accepted Colby's call to come there was I was going to get to teach courses where I shared pieces of our African-American experience, where I taught a course where I told the students, I said, it's called African-American culture in the United States. And we used all these different theories of culture. But I said, I'm going to use one theory of culture that your parents used when they dragged you to the symphony, and that's exposure. And I said, if nothing else, you're going to know what a spiritual is when you leave this course. And I've been faithful to the vision, and God has made a way somehow.
So listen, one of the things that you said, and I want to dovetail for the few moments that we have left, about the Black church being a therapeutic experience for African Americans in this land. I want you to speak a little bit about that, and if you will, go back to the movement and the dance and spirituals, because I think I need you to help me and the Can I Push It crowd understand what is a spiritual. How is it different than a hymn? But start with the therapy, if you will. How is Black church therapeutic? Yes.
Okay, let me start, and they'll come together. Because when I do workshops on spirituals, one of the things that I do is I ask people to name their favorite spirituals.
Okay.
And usually somebody raises his or her hand and says, Amazing Grace. And I say, your check is in the mail, just so I can make a point that a hymn is a composed piece whose author's name we know. So when we're talking about Wesley, Father, I stretch my hand to thee. No other help I know. If thou withdraw thyself from me, whither shall I go? When we're talking about Watts, I love the Lord. He heard my cry and pitied every groan. Long as I live and trouble rise, I hasten to his throne. I love the Lord. He bowed his ear and chased my grief away. Oh, may my heart no more despair while I have breath to pray. That little black book that the deacons have in those churches of my memory. And still, there are some of those churches still today. I was doing some research in California, and I asked a woman who was a part of she was a leader in the environmental racism movement. Here she was, a community worker, worked hard for a long time for change. So I wanted to know where she went to church. I wanted to go visit her church. And she wanted to, oh, well, I'll send you to such and such a church. He's progressive. This is, you want to go to this? I said, no, I want to go to the church you go to. And she got real quiet. And then she gave me the name of the church. And I got there the next day. And this is a wooden church. I'd go in there. Yeah, deacons in black suits on one knee with the book, and they still singing meter hymns. That was what was giving her spiritual strength to deal with the whole environmental racism thing. She thought, since I was a sociologist, I wanted to go someplace progressive, right? And she was going to send me to a place like Alfred Street, right? But no, when I said, no, I want to know where you go. And that's where I found that. But our African brothers and sisters appropriated some of these English hymns into oral tradition. They selected them because there's a lot of them. But spirituals are created. Musicians out there understand, compose. They're created. People would get up and testify. For instance, there's one incident in Leon Litwack's book, Been in the Storm So Long, The Aftermath of Slavery, where these white missionaries from the North come to the South Carolina Sea Islands during the Civil War, and they are going to teach the poor, benighted slaves, almost freed people, the proper way to have church. And so they go there with the intent that they are going to teach them how to be good New England Protestants. And one woman gets up, and it's in the journal of one of the missionaries, so this is how we know this. And she said, my Bible tells me, bing, 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 this is Black folks who supposedly can't read. My Bible tells me that if I were to hold my peace, the very rocks will cry out. And I don't want the rocks to cry out for me. I want to go to heaven in the good old way. The good old way is the right old way. And I want to go to heaven when I die. The congregation took up her testimony and turned it into a spiritual that they sang, added verses to, and then went into a ring shout.
Explain that. I know this, but everyone may not know.
Okay, and the missionaries found themselves at the end of the service crying and weeping and leaning up against the building because the Spirit had come down and hit them too. Okay, the ring shout, when you think of South Carolina Sea Islands, you think of folks, they'd be moving counterclockwise. They get up and start to move as the music moves. And when we hit part of one of the survivals of the shout, they'd be singing the song, and people may want to go online and find the Moving Star Hall singers. Their music is online, Smithsonian, and they sing some of those old songs. And what happens is they go into a whole praise process at the end of the song, and they're really not singing faster. They're just adding complicated percussion with hands and feet on the wooden floor. And so one time I brought somebody up from the South Carolina Sea Islands to do a residency at Colby. And I actually, the physical plant people, I told them what I wanted because I didn't know how to ask for what I wanted, but they figured out what I was talking about. So these Franco-American men in Maine figured out what I was talking about and built me a shout platform so that this South Carolina Sea Island performer had something that he could demonstrate the resonance. And we rocked one of the buildings one day and scared the classics department out of their department when we were down in my class doing the music that goes with a ring shout. But when you're hearing contemporary gospel music with the vamp, and there's a new book by Braxton Shelley that talks about the vamp, you're hearing an echo of that shout where you keep repeating and building on it. What Skip Gates talks about as signifying, it's not just simply repetition, but it's repetition with a creative component to it. So that's the ring shout. Does that answer your question? What's therapeutic? People move. And when you start to think of the logic of, there's one thing where they're having to be dragged to their owners' churches and sit in the balcony and hear somebody preach and say, you're forever ordained to be a slave. or the hired preacher of the owner comes in and preaches to them about don't steal your master's chickens, be good slaves, and all that stuff. And somebody passes the word, we're going to have a meeting tonight out in the Hush Harbors. And until I went down south, because remember, I'm from Cambridge, Massachusetts. I'm like Du Bois. I had to go down south when I started doing this research. And it wasn't until I was driving through Mississippi that I got a sense. I was driving from Memphis straight out, going down to Greenwood. And then you see these huge spaces that are plantations and realize the size and the distance that it really was possible for people to sneak off and have a worship service and not be heard. And so, somebody who has had a whipping, and think about it. And you get to the service and they are trying to heal. Their body has been beaten. And somebody says, well, it says in our Bibles that there's a number that no man can number. Well, who are they? These are they who have come up through great tribulation. You name the evil. That is therapeutic. If you can name the evil, come up through great tribulation. And what did they do? They washed their robes white in the blood of the Lamb. What do you say to that brother or sister whose back is bleeding? I got a robe. You got a robe. Mm-hmm. All God's children got a robe. And when we get to heaven, we're going to put on, and one of my projects that I'm working on, I've published several chapters from it. Academics, when they're working on books, they have different things. They publish articles here, an article there, here, an article there, a chapter. And then when you have enough of them and you write a few more, that's how the book gets out, okay? And I have a project called That Blessed Book, the Bible in the African-American Cultural Imagination, because you have an orature. We are from peoples whose oral traditions made it possible for us to memorize massive amounts of material. 10 to 18% of us who got off the boats in what is now North America. Remember, when we're talking about what is now the United States, we're talking about approximately 400,000 of the 10 million who are landed alive in the New World. Mm-hmm. Okay. That 10 to 18% of them, Alan Austin, Sylvain Diouf, again, we didn't have ushers at the docks with the little counters. I always try to explain that, how do we get these numbers? We're Muslim. And Islam is also a cultural resource. We don't think of it as an African religion because of our sort of stereotypical ways of thinking about religion, but Islam already had an older history on the African continent than Christianity has in the New World now. Okay. So it meant that you had people who could read. We have the evidence of it because there are artifacts in the Smithsonian. There was a text that was found by one of an enslaved man had written this text that people had no idea that it was written in Arabic, but they couldn't translate it until somebody read it out loud. And what happened was he had heard John 1, in the beginning was the word, and the word, he liked it so much he wrote it down. Okay, and as one of my colleagues explained to me, if you're Muslim and you memorize the Quran, you're known as a Hafiz, and you are to be a blessing to your family and larger community. So Islam supports both written and oral tradition. So you only need a few literate people to know they're not telling you about Moses. Mm-hmm. Those who got off the boat. I had one summer while I'm working on this project, God sends me some really great help on the work that I do. And they sent me this wonderful little research. Well, I call him a little research assistant who's over 6 feet tall, but he was so young, little baby faces. So I think he had never read Harry Potter. And I needed all of the references to the room of requirement in Harry Potter. So what part of his job was to read all 7 books and give me a list of all the references to the room of requirement. The other thing was he was Muslim from Senegal and had been educated Catholic. He knew the Bible and he knew the Quran. So I have a Bible parallels that he put together for me that summer. And then when he did the research presentation, he did a list of all the prophets that are in Islam that are also in the Bible. Yeah. So, Daniel, didn't my Lord deliver Daniel? Why not every man? Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air. One of the articles that I've published is on Rock of My Soul in the bosom of Abraham, rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham, rock of my soul in the bosom of Abraham. Oh, rock of my soul. There is only one reference in the King James Bible to the bosom of Abraham. It is in Luke 16. It is the story of the rich man and Lazarus. Hello. And what do we get? We got a home into that rock. That's another spiritual that flags that text. What I'm asking in this book project is, why did our ancestors flag these particular texts, and sort of reimagining what they were going through that made them pick out those texts, sing about them, or tell folklore stories about them so that they're enshrined for us. They're sort of like those little hand signs. What's so special, not only is it about the rich man and Lazarus and how you're supposed to treat Lazarus, but at the end of the story, because Jesus is the one who's telling the story now. Jesus is telling the story. Jesus, the rich man asks them to send somebody to his brother. And the response to the rich man is, if he hears not Moses and the prophets, if one should come back from the dead, it won't do them any good. We claim to be Christian because we believe in one who has come back from the dead. His name is Jesus. Hello. But if you hear not Moses and the prophets, and notice how Jesus says it, the law and the prophets, if you don't hear them, my coming back from the grave is going to do you a bit of good. In other words, if you can't do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God, why bother claiming me? And it's the African American religious tradition. One of the things that we do that is so distinct, and we have not lost it, is we preach the Hebrew Bible. Mm-hmm. We don't have a wall of separation. And that is the one text that tears down that wall of separation. And in that one little reference, we sing about it. And so you start asking those questions, why do these people flag these texts? And boy, all of a sudden, and the more you learn about African religion, the more you learn about African beliefs. We just said farewell to Reverend Dr. Henry Mitchell, who opened that door for so many of us. And the more we learn, the more we see their wisdom. And we are at a point of crisis, I believe, in our experience as African Americans. We need to reclaim that. When we talk about, for instance, meditation, think the first time I had a radio show from 2001 until 2020, I had a radio show, The Uncloudy Day with Dr. Cheryl. 2 hours of good news power for your gospel music listening on WMHB Waterville 89.7 FM. And for our friends on the World Wide Web, that's www.colby.edu/WMHB. But it wasn't just gospel music. It was the whole African-American sacred music tradition, guided by Bernice Johnson Reagan in terms of its importance for tracking African-American history. So they got everything from spirituals and meter hymns to what came in the mailbag the day before and what I got when I went shopping at the at Skippy White's. So the whole range. And when the first time I put one of those old meter hymns where they're singing a cappella, and then I saw how long they were holding each syllable. That's what they tell you to do for breathing, for meditation. And you think of all the folks who have children who are acting out at school and they want them to do transcendental meditation, take them home and help them sing some meter hymns. Have the family sit down and sing some old-fashioned meter hymns together before you have a meal. And you'll be surprised. I had a medical incident after COVID hit. I won't go into details, but I managed to go for 73 years without having high blood pressure. And then the nurse made the mistake of asking me who the president was while I was on the blood pressure cuff. And both my roommate and I, our blood pressure shot up. And all of a sudden I now have, but I can lower my blood pressure just by doing breathing exercises.
Yeah. Yep.
And and get me singing. All right. And then it really drops. So there are things that we did. We didn't know they were healthy. It's like Alice Walker in her poem that she uses at the end of her essay, In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, where she talks about people who didn't know, but did it anyhow. Mm-hmm. Our ancestors didn't know, but they learned how important it was to name the evil, to provide space for people to talk about the evil. You got to name it. So, the testimony service, the old-fashioned prayer meeting services, they helped people survive. They helped people cope. They helped people to know what somebody was going through. Watching people at funerals, when they move around the congregation to hug somebody, to hold somebody, that you are there with people who can put their arms around you when you are having your big cry. Our fraternal organizations, where they have, especially our Prince Hall fraternal organizations, and Brother John Lewis did such a service when he went out and highlighted every aspect of his organized and spiritual life, including his fraternity Omega Omega service, including his Prince Hall memorial service. That when they did the chapter of sorrow for my father, when my father died, I did not cry, because we as preachers, we know how to hold it in so we can get people through funerals. And I'll admit, I'm pretty good at it. I can do it. But what happens is you get too good at it. And my dad passed away. I was in charge, large and in charge. And my friend who I was going to have preach his funeral was out of town. I checked with his close friends. I said, did Daddy ever say he didn't want me to preach his funeral? They said, no. I said, so I preached his funeral. So I managed all of that stuff. It was 6 months to the day before I cried. And I was at a chapter of sorrow service, and I had all of these sisters around me to hug me, to hold me, and to help me go through. Just the same way the old saints used to help you go through the first time you shouted. When but we've got to reclaim that laying on of hands. I'm not eschewing the professional the need for professional services, because like I said, the first time I went to a therapist. My friends from the South tease me. They say, Cheryl, if you had been from the South, you would have answered your call to the ministry sooner, because you would have known if you heard the voice of God, if you weren't dead, then you would be called to the ministry. But in the meantime, you learn, and we do both ends. Du Bois calls us to ever feel our two-ness. We have a second sight, but we can also use our first sight. So that's the therapeutic. And the music, being able to compose and construct narratives of our suffering. Regardless of what we think about hip hop, you're still hearing narratives of our suffering. Mm-hmm. We're still hearing, and the fact that we can say the names of the evil that is upon us is healthy. Is healthy. The fact that we go to services where we call people's names. The biggest criticism I ever heard coming from African Americans who lived in the suburb where my parents lived was they go to a funeral and they say, the minister didn't call the people's names. And you go to a memorial service, they call the names 3 times. Or that, you call the persons, you say their names. What is Black Lives Matter saying to us today? Say their names. But we've been doing that. We've been doing that.
Dr. Jukes, I want to thank you for first of all, for a wonderful narrative and learning about your life and the impact of your father just makes me want to continue to be the best dad I can be. If I have any chance of my sons turning out the way you've turned out, continue to be that great supportive dad. God bless you for having
And,
that
and
kind
I
of
had
loving
my
parent.
mom too, and they were together for 72 years.
What an amazing witness. And to remind us of how the genius of our ancestors who did it when they didn't know what they were doing. They were forging ways to survive
And
the
thrive.
oppressions and the horrors of slavery. And I think that's something that's passed on to us in our worship traditions as to why this is so important, why our faith and our expression and our song and our movement and our gathering really helps keep some of us sane. It's the therapy we need.
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
Dr. Jokes, thank you so much for joining us on Can I Push It? But before you leave, I have one question I have to ask you that I have to ask everyone who comes on Can I Push It as a guest. And please know the answer will determine whether you come back or not. All right? Okay. On grits, sugar or butter and salt? What goes on grits?
When I do grits, it is butter, because I made grits for Daddy when I was taking care of him, and I would make his grits and use real butter, not margarine, not margarine, and no parquet. Butter and cheese.
Cheese?
Yeah, I would make him cheese grits. Yes, with you have to get a good cheddar cheese. You can't just use any cheese. And he loved it. He would get his grits with his sausages, and yeah, but butter, and if you're not having cheese grits, it's butter with the scrambled eggs and the sausages and little tiny bites. I take it you're a sugar person?
I'm a butter and sugar go on grits kind of guy.
Is your family from the Western South?
Actually, Louisiana. They came straight up.
Okay, that's why you're from sugar country. That's why.
That's right.
Hello. Okay.
So justify it, Dr. Jukes. People have been trying to crucify me, but I'm glad you just helped me realize that traces to my Louisiana roots.
Yeah, Louisiana is the one area of what is now the United States where sugar was grown. And plus in the Western South, now Michael, what's Michael's last name? The cooking gene, Gene. You know who I'm talking about. Yeah.
I know his face.
Yeah. And watch the series High on the Hog. But one of the points he makes, because keep in mind, was only 400,000 of us who came to what is now North America. But the internal trade moved us. And the horror, one of the big horrors, we settled in the South Carolina Sea Islands. We built those rice plantations. We were multi-generations there. And then they moved 1.5 million of us. After they marched Native American groups across to Indian territory and took over their land, they moved us. They didn't bring people in. There was us who were already here. And what Michael points out is that the diet deteriorated and the rise of the use of sugar. You need the calories. You need the calories. But Louisiana is sugar country, and growing sugar, and all of that is right there at the coast on the Mississippi River. So folks I know who put sugar on their food are usually in Louisiana, Mississippi area, and that's part of the explanation.
Well, again, thank you for helping me understand my history and defend my culinary choices of why I put sugar on my grits, Dr. Jims. Thank you so much. You've been a blessing to us.
But if we have a chance to have grits together, it has to be real butter.
Real butter, yes, ma'am.
Real butter.
Real butter.
Not margarine. Real butter. My grandmother, real butter.
Dr. Jokes, thank you so much for joining us
so
on this Tuesday night, being a blessing and helping us and be informed. Listen, if you want to point our audience to anything you say pick up, you got to have on your shelf. What are 2 or 3 books you would tell them make sure it's on your shelf as we come to the end of Black History? Besides
Dr. Yolanda Pierce's book.
Okay. Yep. Besides Dr. Pierce. Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Shouting in the Fire.
An American Epistle.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And Vanguard. How Black women broke barriers, won the vote, and insisted on equality for all. And embedded in this book is special attention to church women and their work in their churches. So, and that's by Martha S. Jones. So we have Dante Stewart, Shouting in the Fire. And then my friend Callie Brown Douglas has a new book out.
Does she? We've used her before. Yeah.
Okay. Now you already know about Christians Against Christianity.
Yep.
Okay. And her book, notice I have this right nearby. Resurrection Hope. Resurrection Hope, a future where Black lives matter.
All right. That sounds good. I didn't know Dr. Douglas had a new book out. Thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Dr. Douglas, thank you so much. We look forward to having you back another time.
You're welcome, Pastor Wesley.
All right. Can I push a crowd? Thank you all for another Tuesday night. This is your boy, Pastor Wesley. Remember, it's not my job to make you think what I think. It's my job to make sure you're thinking. We'll catch you next time on Can I Push It? Can I push it?